All right, Commissioner, you are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining in on this beautiful spring Kentucky day. We're together for the April 13th Superintendent Webcast. We have a packed agenda for you to cover. Lots of stuff to unpack after the legislative session and things to think through. We've got some federal funding supports that we're going to walk you through, as well as also some thinking around summer programming and reading. So just a lot to work through and cover. And we've got a star-studded cast of presenters and experts on with us also to answer questions. Before we dive into that, I'll cover the agenda with you. I'll just say that we are in the wake of the legislative session. There were a number of bills put through, chiefly the one that we'll talk about today, Senate Bill 128. That the department didn't initiate, but like you, we're working to sort out and figure out how to execute this and make it a positive thing for our schools and our communities and our students. But there are a ton of questions that have come up, a lot of hypothetical situations, and because we're approaching that May 1st date, a lot of situations that are moving from hypothetical into being very real. So we pledge to remain engaged with you and keep working through and thinking through those situations that we know are oftentimes unique to different students and communities. Just in terms of our agenda for today, we'll have Tony on to cover just some communication updates, things you'll be need to keep track of. Some changes to Healthy at School. We have Dr. Foster on with us to cover that, just as we emerge from this pandemic and things, restrictions continue to be lifted, what changes have taken place and you can expect going forward. Looking into the summer and into the next year, some focus on supports around reading into the summer and into next year. We've got Mickey Ray and Misty Higgins on to talk with us about that. We have an unprecedented infusion of federal dollars coming. We thought ESSER 2 was big. ESSER 3 is almost double that again. So we've got Robin Kinney on to talk about ESSER 3, what you can expect with that and what some of the regulations there are around it. We also have Ben Maynard and Marty Park on to talk with us about virtual learning options for next school year. We did make some changes to how that could be funded in districts. There's a waiver process that's available, so we want to make sure that you're aware of that and trying to create as much flexibility as you design programs that are the right fit for your kids and community as possible. We'll spend an extended amount of time on supplemental school year program, Senate Bill 128. We have Meredith Brewer and Chuck Truesdale, our respective directors of education policy and governmental relations, on with us to walk through that, as well as some guests from KIA and from KHSAA. So we know that there are lots of questions about this and how we sort through it. And then we'll finish up with questions and answers. So that is what our agenda looks like today. As you can see, it is action-packed with lots of information. So we'll jump right in and turn things over to Tony to cover communications updates. Tony.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be pretty quick. Just a couple things I'd like to mention. Obviously, you know that for those of you who have been aware of the Commissioner's Listening Tour, we launched those last week. We've had 2 events so far. What you're seeing there on the slide is just a screenshot of what we do after the breakout rooms. So that involves one of our students that is leading the breakout rooms. And we have 8 more that are coming up, including one this Thursday for the Bowling Green area. The great thing about the virtual tours is you don't have to live in that particular area in order to participate. And we would love to see in all of these tours more students and family involvement. The breakout rooms are very minimal. We usually keep them to about 10 to 15 people. So there's lots of great discussions that are being led by our students. So just wanted to share that with you on the slides, which you have received in your email on your calendar. There's that link where you can register to attend. The next slide that I have, oops, if I can get to it, there we go, sorry, is, those are just the dates there. I'm really excited to announce that something that we began last year, we are going to continue this year. I just sent an email out to everyone, all the superintendents, just a few minutes ago. Due to the popularity of this campaign last year, we are going to do our social media shout outs again for the class of 2021. All of the information about that you can find on the slide. I'm not going to go over everything. However, I just want to make sure everyone knows the photos must be submitted by a school district employee, and they must display, healthy and safety guidelines that are outlined in our Healthy at Schools document, including social distancing and mask wearing, as we know that masks have been enforced since the beginning of the school year. So all the pictures should have students wearing masks and appropriate social distancing. And we will not be able to use photos that do not follow the guidelines. So we're really excited. On here we say at least 5, but we're looking for 5 to 10. And you have about 2 weeks to submit those. Last year we received about 2,000 photos. I think every high school in the state submitted, and we ran several of those a day. And it just gives you a little of example there on the left from Henry County High School of what they looked like. Obviously post, this is pre-pandemic pictures, but just to give you an idea. All right, the next, and then I guess I will toss it off to Dr. Foster with any updates for Healthy at School. Dr. Foster?
Great, thank you. Mine are very short and sweet. This is not new information, but I did want to touch base with you about it since it had been released. On the first thing we want to address is social distancing, and these changes came out on March the 22nd. And they can be found on page 6 and 7 of Healthy at Schools. As we mentioned earlier to you all, that you can now move the distance between students in the classroom from 6 feet to 3 feet, but students and staff all still need to continue to wear their mask at all times. You must continue the social distancing of 6 feet in any common areas such as hallways, cafeterias, gymnasiums, auditoriums. And then middle and high school students, they can be 3 feet in the classroom, but if the community level spreads to what is considered a high level, then middle school and high school need to return to 6 feet of social distancing. So if you haven't looked at the specifics of these on page 6 and 7 in Healthy at Schools, I encourage you to review those pages because it goes into a little bit greater detail. The next slide will deal with temperature screenings, and this information was released on April 1st, and some of our districts were on spring break during that time, and they may have missed the information, but schools are no longer expected or required to screen students or staff for temperatures when entering the school bus or the school building. So no longer if you were doing attempts on the bus or as they are getting off the bus or as they were going into the building, none of that is required anymore for your students or your staff. However, if you're at school and you have a student or a staff member that has symptoms, then part of that screening would be to take the temperature. And those are the 2 changes that I wanted to share with you today. That's all I have. Thank you, Tony.
All right, thank you, Dr. Foster. I think we'll go right into our next item on the agenda, which is accelerating student learning during summer learning and through the academic year. And for that, we have Mickey Ray and Misty Higgins. I knew I was going to do that.
Thank you so much, Tony. Yes, we are happy to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tony noted, Misty Higgins is here with me as well, and she's a professional learning coordinator in the Division of Program Standards. And my name is Mickey Ray, and I am the director of that division. And Misty and I will be expanding upon the guidance document that was released yesterday. And it serves as an expansion to what Dr. Woods Tucker, our deputy commissioner, has previously shared with the Commissioner Superintendents Advisory Council. And Dr. Woods Tucker is also here with us today and will be available to address questions at the end of the presentation as well. So I want to begin by saying that what we'll be sharing and what was released in the guidance, it was based upon research for accelerating student learning. But please know that we understand and acknowledge that schools and districts may need to adapt these structures based on local needs assessments, student data, and available resources. So if we take a look at the next slide, First, when schools and districts are creating local acceleration plans, they should be grounded in evidence-based strategies and practices that provide students with more time and dedicated attention focused on immersing students in grade level standards. Ultimately, the plan should ensure that they are giving students the just-in-time supports around the building blocks necessary to allow students to successfully engage with grade level content. Yet the plans also should include strategies that support students' social, emotional, and behavioral needs so that students are in the physical and emotional state that enables them to learn. Next, the KDE guidance document includes research-based recommendations for creating effective summer learning programs designed to accelerate student learning, the integration of social emotional learning into those summer learning programs, and using high-intensity tutoring and vacation academies throughout the school year to provide ongoing support to meet students' academic needs. And on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about summer learning. So the summer learning guidance was based on research from the RAND organization and the Wallace Foundation. And both of these provided just a comprehensive analysis of multiple summer learning programs and different approaches to help determine what is most effective in accelerating student learning during the summer. And what we have in the guidance document will mirror what you will also see in national guidance as well as that from independent organizations, because the recommendations do meet ESSA Tier 1 standards for impacting student achievement in math and Tier 3 standards for impacting student achievement in reading and social and emotional learning. So I'm going to turn it over to Misty at this time to discuss the specific recommendations for summer learning.
And go ahead, thank you. Based on an analysis of their research, they found the following structure to be most effective in accelerating student learning during summer programming. So the program would be 5 to 6 weeks in length with 5 days of programming each week. And then each day in the morning, there would be an uninterrupted block of academic instruction. And within that block, you would see 60 to 90 minutes of math instruction and then 90 to 120 minutes of reading and writing instruction. And then following the academic block each day, there would be 2 to 3 hours of enrichment activities. And then finally, there would be small classes of up to 15 students per teacher. And just like Mickey said earlier, while this is the recommended structure from the research, we recognize that schools and districts may need to adapt this structure just based on your local needs assessment and analysis of your student data, as well as the resources that you have available at the local level. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So in addition to this overall structure, the guidance takes a closer look at 8 evidence-based practices that were identified in the research as being critical to the implementation of an effective summer program. And you can see those 8 practices on this slide. Now, when you get into the guidance document, you will find the same organization and design for each of these practices. There's going to be information inside of a blue box and information inside of a gray box. So for each practice, the blue box is going to state the importance of that practice from the research in the implementation of an effective program. So why is that practice so important to consider when designing your local program? Then the gray box will focus in on recommendations from the research to support schools and districts in translating that practice into action at the local level. And again, you're going to see that same setup for each of the 8 practices.
Okay, next slide, please. So even when we implement an effective summer learning program, we know that not all students will choose to attend. And even for students who do attend, many will still need continued support throughout the academic school year. So the second part of the guidance document takes a look at research-based approaches for accelerating student learning during the school year. And so based on research from the Annenberg Institute at Brown University and McKinsey & Company, the guidance addresses 3 crucial supports, starting with providing all students with access to quality, standards-aligned Tier 1 instruction. And in addition to immersing students in strong Tier 1 instruction, 2 supplemental research-based approaches addressed within the guidance are high-intensity tutoring and vacation academy. So Missy is going to go into a bit more detail about both of those options as well.
So on the next slide, we're going to talk about high-intensity tutoring. So these programs provide students with individualized tutoring sessions 3 or more times a week that addresses content that meets students where they are, but also links back to what is being taught in the regular classroom. And this goes back to those just-in-time supports. So what are the missing building blocks that students need at that moment in time to successfully engage with the grade level content? And we know from the research that students who participate in high-intensity tutoring programs can gain 1 to 2 additional years of math in 1 year's time. And that held true for students in grades 3 through 12. Now, when it comes to reading and writing, the research showed that high-intensity tutoring is most effective with students in grades K through 2. And now with vacation academies. So this is where students would receive 25 hours of targeted instruction in a single subject during week-long vacation breaks. So that could be fall break, a week of winter break, spring break, and it could also be a week during the summer. And again, the research shows that students who participate in these vacation academies can gain up to 3 months of additional learning in that 1 week's time in the targeted subject area. And again, to support schools and districts in utilizing these 2 approaches, in the guidance document, you're going to see something that's called at-a-glance pages. And these pages are going to focus on 8 design principles from the research to consider when implementing each approach at the local level.
So again, I'm not sure if, Tony, how we're structuring questions. I know we may be waiting to the end, and that's okay. So thank you.
Yes, if you all don't mind, if you can hang with us for most of the webcast, and we'll get to the questions towards the end. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
All right, up next we have Robin Kinney to talk about more money. Robin?
Thank you, Tony. Pleasure to be here with you again this afternoon. I kept thinking the way to kick this off, and the phrase that kept coming through my mind was same song, different verse. And so now we do have round 3 to ESSER funding that will be available for our local schools and districts. ESSER 3 is to help safely reopen and sustain safe operations of our schools and districts and to mitigate the impact of COVID on students. On this first slide, you'll see that the ESSER 3 is comprised of nearly $122 billion for grants to states, Kentucky's allocation being just over $2 billion. And so the commissioner had referenced, we thought we had a lot with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Here comes additional funds to help support our staff, districts, and our students. At least 90% of the funds from ESSER 3 are to be used for subgrants to our local school districts, and there's the amount right there on the slide. And you'll see that these funds, the grant period, will be available through September 30th of 2024. If you'll please keep this in mind, as I'll come back to dates at the end of the presentation with good news of operational updates, and we'll talk further about dates. Like ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, these are allocated to state education agencies based upon Title I. And our subgrants from SEAs to local districts are also based upon the LEA's share of Title I funds received in the most recent fiscal year. So that methodology, once again, is determined and provided to us by USAID. Next slide, please. So ESSER 3 is a little bit different this time. While USAID has made access to ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds pretty easy, in ESSER 1 we did a state application, and then in ESSER 2 it was treated like a supplemental award with no application. ESSER 3 status is going to require a state application via a USAID template. And they have not yet posted that US template for us, but they have awarded 2/3 of the total state allocation to us already. And then the remaining 1/3 of the allocation will be released upon that approval of that application and plan submitted by KDE. We will internally have the same process as with ESSER 1 and 2. Districts will provide assigned assurance and a spending plan. Those have not yet been posted. If you'll pay attention to the Commissioner's Monday message, we will announce that in the Commissioner's Monday message, but you will be providing that through GMAP as you have in the past. For planning purposes, and we know districts are anxious to learn their amount, For planning purposes, the the ESSER 3 allocation amounts will be posted today on our KDE Federal Grants webpage. So if you'll take a look at the KDE Federal Grants webpage, you will see the allocations for each of your districts posted today. Next slide, please. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about the subgrants to our local school districts. Since we have already will be posting those allocations today, we will meet the expectation of posting within 60 days your allocation amounts. And then I want to specifically really highlight this new and different thing about ESSER 3. So in ESSER 3, of the funds that are allocated to our local school districts, you must reserve not less than 20% of your district allocation to address learning loss, and that is through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. They give some examples there. Some are learning, some are enrichment, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, and to ensure that such interventions respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on the student subgroups described. So I wanted to make sure that you had that exact language from the Act for your 20% reservation. I think many of our local school districts are already planning and utilizing funds in this manner. However, with ESSER 3, there is a specific reservation of that 20% to be used in this purpose. Next slide, please. The remaining 80% of your ESSER funds for the district allocations can be used very similar to our ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 district allocations. So it's back to those things that you're very familiar with, anything under ESSA. We've also included here just some examples: ventilation systems, social distancing guideline implementation, PPE again, all those things that you're very, very familiar with and have been expending dollars for already. I would note that there are no equitable services requirements for the LEAs as part of ESSER 3. Once again, like in ESSER 2, the Department of Education will be operating and implementing a separate EANS, or Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools program. And for those on the call today that are part of the non-public school programs, we will be providing additional information to you on that second round of EANS funding at a later date. Next slide, please. So the other thing that is unique about ESSER 3 is it does contemplate a return to in-person instruction plan. So districts must develop and make public available on their website, not later than 30 days after receiving the allocation of funds, a plan for the safe return to in-person instruction. So keep in mind, the language in the Act is designed really to apply to all states across the United States, and everyone's in various stages of reopening their schools and districts to in-person instruction. And Kentucky is in many cases ahead of the game. So all of our districts are already open with in-person instruction or hybrid options. So the language that is in the Act does have an exception, and that's set forth in the last bullet on this slide. That this public available announcement and comment is not applicable if, prior to March 11th of 2021, your district developed a plan for the safe return to in-person instruction, and we assume that all schools and districts have done that, that included and considered public comments and is publicly available on your website. So if you have done that, then you don't have to go through this step in the ESSER requirements again. Next slide, please. The state, as the SEA, also from the state set aside, there is an allowance for a 10% set aside for state use. The state, like districts, has certain reservation requirements for those funds that have to be utilized in a certain manner, and that is reflected on this slide. At least 5% of the total funds for activities that address learning loss, again, very similar to the language that you saw in the LEA reservation, also has to be utilized in this manner by the state. At least 1% of the total funds to implement evidence-based summer enrichment programs and at least 1% for evidence-based comprehensive after-school programs. And you'll see the rest of the 10% there. The next slide, please. The next slide just shows, in the interest of transparency, we've provided the dollar amounts provided to us by the U.S. Department of Education, which will allocate state set-aside dollars to the specific purposes of the Act. Next slide, please. We have heard in the past about maintenance of effort and requirements, and so the state does have certain maintenance of efforts requirements. We also have certain maintenance of equity requirements, which is new and different under ESSER 3. Maintenance of equity was not required on either ESSER 1 or ESSER 2. So the state will be looking at maintenance of equity based upon high need districts and high poverty districts. Next slide, please. And then local school districts will also have a maintenance of equity requirement for ESSER 3 dollars. I have actually included the actual language from the bill here. We've already had a lot of questions that US Ed is working to provide us guidance on the maintenance of equity, since this is a new and different piece to funding that we haven't had before. So we will be providing additional information as well as full guidance in a written document, as we have with the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds. But this is a piece that we're going to need to get more information from US Ed before we can really flesh that out further. Next slide, please. I had briefly touched on there are provisions for the emergency assistance to non-public schools, EANS 2. Kentucky's estimated allocation is about $42 million, and also would be available through September 30th of 2024 with the Tidings Amendment. For our non-public listeners that are on here today, one thing of note from the EANS 2 second round of funding, unlike EANS 1, EANS 2 funds cannot be used to provide reimbursements to any non-public schools. So we'll be working with those non-public schools just on the provision of services and commodities. Next slide, please. Finally, I always want to provide operational updates, things that we have learned along the way since we last updated you on information related to funding. And this time we're going to focus on grant periods. We had a lot of questions from our local school districts and even from our own KDE staff about the actual language that is in each of the ESSER acts that talk about the grant period. And so we followed up with the U.S. Department of Education and with our Kentucky State representative to ask the question about the differences in between what the Act actually has said. And I've given the example in the first bullet on this slide that talks about ESSER 3 funds through September 30th, 2023. However, in further consultation with the U.S. Department of Ed, they have shared with us that the Tidings Amendment period, which typically has the state asking for an additional length of time, up to a year for tidings, those are going to be automatically applied to ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. So with that indication from the U.S. Department of Ed, we wanted to share with you the good news that the funds that previously we thought were available just looking at the Act do have an extra year according to the Tiding Amendment period. So we've put the new dates there on this slide. Additionally, I've put in a link that I found very helpful that I'd like to share with each of you. It is a U.S. Department of Education publication. It is entitled the ESSER 3 Fact Sheet. It contains lots of the information that I've just gone over with you in one place so that you can take a look at it. But more importantly, as we continue and we have received multiple rounds of funding, it's easy to get some of them confused or trying to sort through and remember what applies to which of the three pots of money. So in this link, you will find a very helpful, at least I found very helpful, kind of spreadsheet, and it puts ESSER 1, 2, and 3 into 3 columns and then goes through each of the items and tell you what tell you which items apply to which round of funding. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. It's a good document, and I found it very helpful as a reference tool. And that's all that I have for ESSER 3 at this point. I'm happy to return it back to the Commissioner or Tony. I'm not sure who's next.
Thanks, Robin. I think we will just go right on to our next item on the agenda, which is the virtual learning options for 2021 and 2022. We have Marty Park and Ben Maynard to take us on that tour.
Thank you so much, Tony. So glad to be back with you today and to share this opportunity. This is definitely a hot topic that we know many districts are discussing. In fact, we already know that 143 of our public school districts, that's about 84%, offer some kind of virtual learning option for students. And so today we will be discussing the structures of the waiver and the process, which is really just one small step toward our continued growth and quality work of online and virtual school options throughout Kentucky Public Schools. However, soon we will be launching opportunities around what we're referring to as our Kentucky Online and Virtual Schools Network. So we're very excited about that, and that's largely focused on high quality experiences of our students. And so, Tony, before we get advancing through some of the points that we want to make, I just wanted to make a few driving points here. So expanding learning options to meet the needs of all of our students, specifically at all grade levels, including credit accumulation, we refer to credit acceleration, and also credit rescue efforts. Dr. Glass was awesome this morning with our student advisory, Commissioner Student Advisory Group. You have some awesome students who participate on that, shared that forms of what school look like are only going to expand. And then I would add and gain superpowers. And so this is just a sign of that in Kentucky. This is also for students and families with a direct need when it is a good fit. And I want to key on that when it's a good fit. So we will continue pushing on the idea of fit or candidacy. So students who are great candidates for a full-time enrolled virtual experience as we move forward into the 21-22 school year, all through local enrollment policies and practices. So before we dig into the details, we want to make sure that we all have a clear understanding that this is the targeted nature of this waiver that we're going to discuss. So again, we're really just going to hit on the waiver details today. But it's all about the design and the experiences that are right for your students. We know that from district to district, there are similarities with neighboring districts. However, as always, there will be very unique customizations that you are thinking about. And we've already spoken with superintendents and instructional leaders and DPPs and ed tech leaders about this conversation. So we know that. This waiver brings about a very high bar. So it's this total package of new opportunities, such as a seat time waiver for attendance, packaged with performance-based options that we've always had opportunities of, and we still want to leverage those. And so together, we provide a ton of flexible options, or what I refer to as the freedom to design. And so Tony has the first slide pulled up with some key points, and I want to draw attention, if we can, to these key points for big takeaways for this specific waiver opportunity. Number one, traditional performance-based virtual options are the same that we had before pandemic, during the pandemic, and post-pandemic. And so that's important to us as we move forward. We want to make sure that those options are available for performance-based virtual options. They've always been available by law for students grades 5 through 12. And they will continue to be available, that option of performance-based. However, the question comes up of what about our students K through 4? So the waiver that we're discussing today and that we've published and we will be accepting applications on now through the end of the month really is opportunities for grades K through 4, but also if you like the design of what you're shooting for students grades K through 4, then you can extend that beyond. But again, it is a higher bar because it is that congruent kind of seat time feel as our in-person brick and mortar experiences of kids. So also performance-based attendance credit is given upon successful completion of coursework. That's key to point out that in the traditional methods that we've had of performance-based, that's complete, upon successful completion. And this does not require a waiver. And so if you want to move forward with your virtual experiences, maybe it's full-time enrolled virtual experiences, maybe it is some part-time or course pickups on some virtual courses that you're offering for that hybrid approach for students. If you're going to continue to structure those in a performance-based method, then you do not need a waiver for that. That continues to be an opportunity. So Tony, if we can go to the next slide. However, if you want to, number one, have an option for K-4 students, because again, that performance-based option is not available for K-4 students by law, then it requires the approval of a waiver for very specific sections of the pupil attendance regulation. So with the approved waiver, our students who are full-time enrolled virtual school students, and we know that they're being designed right now. We had districts who had awesome full-time enrolled virtual learning academies. And what we will continue to say is virtual schools, programs, or academies. And so we know that with this waiver, we can count and students can be counted in daily attendance. So only students who follow district policy for requesting full-time virtual enrollment will be eligible for this option. And that our waiver process gets into that. So districts cannot assign students to this option involuntarily, and that's a point that we know is just a point to make, and it's a point that we want you as district leaders and school leaders to celebrate as well. We're not going to assign students to this experience. We want that to be a partnership with with our families. But the waiver approval is based on district assurances of multiple components necessary to build together a high quality full-time virtual option. We do believe that the assurances that are built into the waiver can really be an architect plan for your enrollment plan locally. And so we'll touch on that here in a bit. So next slide, please. So the key point of what's being waived in 702 KAR 7:125, Section 1 for pupils shall be physically present in school to be counted in attendance except under the following conditions. We want to call out in that definition, the school through this waiver process will also include a virtual school program or academy established by one of our Kentucky public school districts. And so I also want to key in that the things that we're shooting for in this waiver, in the assurances, are also largely captured in the annual superintendent assurance regarding our Kentucky digital learning guidelines. And so just as a note to touch on those, one of the key points there is monitoring each student's interactions, engagements online, allowing for synchronous or live visual verbal interactions is key, along with the review of student work and the completion of assignments in both real time and on demand in terms of instructional design. So that's key for us. So next slide, please. Daily attendance of pupils in elementary school, we know by law shall be determined by taking attendance one time each day to start the day, in the day at the start of instruction. Knowing that we also have pupil entry and exit logs. So what we're asking for in the waiver in your design, though, is to bump that from one time per day to 2 times. And so we're capturing that start of instruction along with once at the beginning of instruction, along with once more in the second half of the day, really accounting for that that funding mechanism of making sure that we have an understanding of a full day of attendance for a student, as well as a partial day from a funding mechanism perspective. Next slide, please. And so this is the bulk of the conversations that we have and will continue to have with you, with our school districts. in your design work, you are working through, is this a program that you are offering? Is it a full-time program, typically an A5 classified program? Is it maybe an academy that you have established? Maybe it was a response to pandemic. However, it's something that you have decided is a great option for your students moving forward post-pandemic. And so whether it's a program or academy, now we also want to key in that we could have a school district design an A1 school around full-time virtual enrollment. We do not see that today. However, it is an option. And so you will be working through whether you're designing a school program or academy, or you're going to take a program or academy that you already have and you're leveling that up a bit, if you will. And so next slide, please, to target how important it is for you up front to determine, is this a waiver that you are asking for, again, for just a few grade levels at a time? Maybe it's an elementary school that you're requesting waiver for. Maybe that's kindergarten through 5th grade. Or maybe in your district, your virtual academy, your virtual learning academy, if you will, or your virtual program is something that you're going to have established as an option for kindergarten through 12th grade students. And so in the waiver process, you're going to identify that. And so next slide, please, to get to, we wanted to specifically target and have a discussion about some of the assurances. Now, there are 15 assurances, and I said a bit ago, but I want to key in on these 15 assurances can really give you the basis by which you structure your enrollment strategy for students. But we're going to call out just 4 specific assurances of the 15. But you know, really, if you're interested in this work, digging into all 15 is super important. So assurance number 4, a great opportunity as we transition post-pandemic into this opportunity through this waiver process for students who are full-time enrolled virtual students to now have the benefits of all truancy laws and being able to develop policies that address virtual attendance absences, which include obviously entry and exit practices, but giving you the opportunity to have structures in place by which to work with students and families if students disengage or become absent, as opposed to this current school year where we've had a loss of participation and not felt like we had those truancy laws to help us. And so wanted to point that out. Assurance number 5 is all about families who are requesting to be enrolled in the virtual school program. Again, we do not see an opportunity or an avenue by which students are placed without the opportunity for families to request and understand that work and what that entails. But only students whose families have requested are in the waiver. And then also school and district approved documentation resulting from locally adopted policies for enrollment. And so this gives you the opportunity to really structure what your enrollment looks like, to understand students, the candidacy of students. We also want to point out that no student should involuntarily be placed, as mentioned, but also that students no student shall be placed in a virtual school program or academy solely due to disciplinary reasons. Definitely students who have an individual education program, an IEP, that admissions or that enrollment into the virtual program is involved, and the admissions and release committee is definitely involved in that work to make sure that it's a great fit for students and that it is an opportunity for students. So next slide, please, and we'll hit on just 2 more assurances that are worth calling out. Assurance number 8. The virtual school program or academy shall have teachers and other staff assigned to support and provide instruction aligned to grade level expectations established in our Kentucky academic standards. That's a strong point for us. The use of standards aligned high quality instructional resources and curriculum, again pointed to in our Kentucky digital learning guidelines, but also that there's a system of maintaining evidence of having formative assessment processes in place. So that we accurately measure student progress. That is very important for this work, just as it's important for in-person. learning strategies and designs. And so we want to make sure that is still consistent. And so next slide, and we'll get to the final assurance that we wanted to call out, and then we will wrap up. So assurance number 9 gets at the learning design, and I mentioned earlier that setting a higher bar, in this waiver, we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for implementing synchronous, real-time, or live learning strategies. Now, it's definitely going to leverage our teachers. It's definitely going to leverage digital platforms, but two-way student-to-teacher visual and verbal interactions is key. It's also important that we have on-demand or asynchronous interactions with students. Now, most of our virtual learning experiences today that are performance-based structures heavily leverage the on-demand or asynchronous learning strategies. But if we're going to have a waiver in place for seat time attendance, we want to pull in the synchronous learning strategies. And so that's key to this work. And assurance number 9 really pinpoints that, so that when you are designing, then you can make sure that you have all things that in place that you're going to need for that assurance and to feel good about that. So next slide, please, as we wrap up. One of the last questions in the waiver application before you submit it is how instruction will be delivered for students in the program. And that includes those full-time enrolled students, including but not limited to the descriptions of digital platforms, how our teachers are going to interact, how we're going to collect evidence. Now, this narrative, we've already worked with, just in the last couple of days, some district leaders have shared their thinking, and there's a lot of good ideas that are coming forth, especially if you're just now designing what this will look like, what this experience will look like with your students. But we're excited about these these narratives that are coming in, because I think it really helps us nail down exactly what we're looking for. So final thoughts, Tony, we can go to the last piece here. Final thoughts are, we want to really make sure that, and we have answered, and this question has been asked a couple of times, I think it was submitted already, a virtual learning option is not required for next school year, for the 2021-22 school year. However, it has been cited by district leaders that to reduce possibility of losing students, that it is something that districts are looking at to develop if you do not already have a full-time enrollment or full-time enrolled virtual learning option. So it is not required, but it is definitely a strategy to be thinking about. The waiver for the 21-22 school year is only for next school year right now. It is a seat time attendance waiver, as I mentioned earlier. That's, a couple superintendents shared that's the way they're thinking about it. It is not a waiver, and I want to point in on this as we close out and transition to the next topic. But it is not a waiver to allow performance-based designs at the K-4 level. I'll say that again. It's not. This waiver does not allow you to implement performance-based designs kindergarten through 4th grade. What this does is it waives and allows you to take attendance for your full-time virtual enrolled students, K-4 or K through whatever grade level you determine. So there's a slight difference there, and I think that's important. And finally, we can require students to transition back to in-person, into our school buildings, our brick and mortar school buildings, if it is not working for the students. So we want to have on-ramps and off-ramps for learning for the right students at just the right time, making sure that we have good transitions back and forth in this new option. So Tony, thank you so much. I suspect, and I hope we'll have some, great questions as we wrap up, and we'll hang on to answer some of these questions. Thank you.
Hey, Tony, I want to interject just at the end of Marty's presentation. Thank you, Marty. Great information. And could you go back one slide, please, Tony?
Sure. This one?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So, so as Marty indicated, the waiver is only for next year. So we're doing a 1-year waiver. But we are looking at, if these are successful, how we might continue this. So that could be, there's a waiver process annually, or if we make we may make changes to state regulations that would allow this to continue forward, or we may have to make changes to state law that would allow this going forward. So while this process is something that we put together just in response to comments that we'd gotten that there was a desire for schools to do this, so this was our solution for this year. We are working on longer range options as well. So I think it's safe for you to design these schooling options thinking that there would be the ability to continue them going forward. We just have to work on what's the right legal mechanism to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Glass. Are we ready to move on to the next ones? Looks like we have supplemental school year. I think what everybody has been waiting for, and our two guests of honor are ready to answer. We have a couple of extra guests who are here to help as well. So in addition to Meredith Brewer and Chuck Truesdell, we have Julian Tackett. I believe Amanda Ellis from CPE is on, as is Becky Kilpatrick. So I will go ahead and give it away to Meredith and Chuck with the PowerPoint.
Thanks, Tony. So just a quick overview on the process for this program. So students need to submit a written request to their districts by May 1st, expressing their interest to participate in the program. And then by June 1st, districts need to determine if they want to participate. And so it does specify in the bill that it is an all or nothing. So all of the students who submitted a request by May 1st, if the district decides to participate, would be approved for the supplemental year. If the district chooses to not participate, then no one would be able to. And then by June 16th, districts will submit their intention to participate to the KBE and any waiver requests that they have. We'll be providing more information about that submission process, but it will be in GMAP, and it will be a set of assurances that districts need to indicate that they will comply with in order to participate in the program.
And I would reiterate that even for those districts that choose not to participate in the supplemental school year program, you will still have the traditional flexibilities that you have always had in law to promote or retain students as the situation merits. So if you choose not to take part, that doesn't mean you're forced to promote students whose academic or social emotional needs would suggest otherwise. On the accountability side of things, students who take the end of year assessments will have to take those end of year assessments for the grades in which they are enrolled. So if they are in 8th grade this year and they repeat 8th grade, they will again take the 8th grade assessments at the end of next year, even if that'll mean taking them twice in a row. And as a reminder, students who repeat a high school year, so this year's freshmen, sophomores, juniors, will be counted as graduating in 5 years for federal accountability purposes. Unlike the seniors who graduate this year, obviously will be graduating in 4 years and then returning for a supplemental year. But if they are enrolled for 5 years in high school without achieving those graduation requirements, or achieving those graduation requirements at the end of the 5th year, they will be counted as 5-year graduates for federal accountability purposes. And that is something that we do not have any control over. Next slide, please.
Okay, for funding, all students participating in the program will be included in SEEK calculations, and that includes those graduated seniors who would be returning. And just like always, this sort of trails. So your SEEK for this upcoming year will be calculated as outlined in 208, but subsequent SEEK payments will include these students. You may use the ESSER federal funding to supplement any additional costs associated with these students returning for a supplemental year. Next slide.
So this is one that we've gotten some questions on. State statute says students who have met all diploma requirements shall be issued a diploma. This is not something that we can waive. This is in state law. And so to accommodate that, once they have graduated, as always happens when a student graduates, their transcript is locked, as it were. Their GPA is frozen. At that point, the credits that they have earned, the grades that they have earned are frozen. So those seniors who have graduated and will return next year, that supplemental information can be included. You can track that. But for instance, If a student gets, whatever grade, if they took, say, English 4 this year, and then they take English 4 again next year, and next year they get an A, whereas this year they got a C, that A will not count. It will be unweighted in terms of calculating their GPA. So when college or other institutions see that, they will see their 4-year GPA, but the A that they got this year or the next year, the 5th year, will be noted. For those of you, a lot of folks have asked this question, and again, to echo what Tony said, we do have Becky Gilpatrick from the Higher Education Assistance Authority with us to answer questions today. The KHEAA guidance states that graduated seniors who have graduated and will come back next year, are not eligible for those dual credit or work-ready scholarships. Next slide.
So as specified in the bill, courses that are repeated or that are taken during the supplemental year should be repeats of courses that the student did not successfully complete during the 2020-21 school year, or have a reasonable connection to the courses they took, so that they would be supplementing what they took previously. However, that is a local decision, so each school district can determine what course access students have as part of the supplemental program, but they are not required to provide access to a new set of courses for those returning students. Students cannot earn credit twice for the same course. So in the example that Chuck used, a student who took English 4, they can't have that count twice for another credit, or English 3, they can't have that count as the additional credit that they need to fulfill their graduation requirements. Districts are able to determine how grades are applied for underclassmen, and if they are able to replace a grade if they do repeat a course. The early graduation program has not changed as part of this, and so students still need to follow all of those requirements in order to graduate ahead of their regularly scheduled graduation date. Okay, next slide.
When we get into the various special populations, just broadly speaking, the supplemental school year program is not a reason to remove any of the guidelines that currently apply to any of these special populations. It's not a replacement, it is a supplement. So to that end, IDEA funds cannot be used once a student turns 22. Those federal funds are only applicable to students up to the age of 21. And furthermore, this program is voluntary. Students cannot be forced into it. So it is not, you can't make it mandatory and then use that to provide the compensatory education as required under IDEA. Homeless foster care students, they still have the right to attend their school of origin, which is the school where they started off the school year. And so you have to make accommodations, and keep in mind when you're approving or disapproving the district-wide plan that these students must be accommodated despite the transient nature of those students. And then finally, English learners must have equal access. So particularly right now, if you are advertising the supplemental school year program to your students, make sure that those materials are available in all the languages that your students are learning in, so that they are aware of the opportunities available to them.
So along those same lines as well, students who have been identified to receive gifted services must still have access to those supports, and so they should still be, if they are identified, they should be given those same accommodations they had, as well as any students who have IEPs or 504s, those should be taken into consideration when the district is deciding whether or not to participate, that those plans would still be enforceable.
And finally, I believe our last slide on this program, Senate Bill 128, if you look at the language of the bill, it applies to grades K through 12, so it does not apply to preschool. So therefore, schools can do what they've always been able to do for the preschool program. For income eligible students, districts may enroll a kindergarten age child in state-funded preschool if space is available and it's a local decision, but you will not and cannot receive state funds for enrollment in that program. And second, if the child has a disability, the ARC would determine whether that's the least restrictive environment, and they may consider preschool as the appropriate setting for those students. And that, I believe, wraps it up on Senate Bill 128 overview. Guidance is posted on our website under the District School Support tab. And we are, along with all of the other subjects we've had today, ready for your questions.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. And great job, team. We are right at an hour on presentations. So we are ready to jump over to the Google form and answer any questions that you have. I think I'm going to start with ESSER 3, Commissioner, if that's okay. And then, because there's quite a few, obviously, on 128. So let me go ahead and do that. The first question that we have is, will we be able to hire teachers for virtual academy using ESSER 3 funds and administrators to manage the virtual academy?
So Tony, this is Robin. Salaries are a permissible expense. I mean, I don't think just because it's in a virtual mode versus an in-person mode really makes any difference. So you would be able to hire your teachers. Again, you're focusing on, with all your expenditures for ESSER 3, just like ESSER 2 and ESSER 1, you need to ask yourself that overarching question about how we are using these funds to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the coronavirus pandemic. So that should always be your overarching question to start out with, but being able to use the ESSER 3 funds for teachers, administrators that is permissible expense.
Okay, thank you, Robin. Next question, can ESSER 3 funds be utilized to upgrade or update ATC equipment?
Yes, that is another permissible expense from ESSER 3 or ESSER 2 funds. Yes.
Unvideoed and unmuted. I'm having issues with my dogs at the house here, y'all. Sorry about that. Next question. Does the ESSER 3 cover hiring of staff like interventionists, additional teachers, administrations for gap reductions? Could we mix partial grant funding with ESSER 3 dollars to create a position for learning loss like MTSS administrator?
Yeah, I like that question very much because when we talk about the types of people, it appears that this district is envisioning hiring. They all kind of lean toward that, responding to the impact of the coronavirus, catching kids up, thinking about how they can supplement their already services to help those kids that might be suffering with learning loss. So yes, those are all permissible expenditures from ESSER 3.
Okay. Trying to scroll through here and see if there's any other ESSER. Looks like another. Are there class size recommendations for summer classes to address learning loss with ESSER monies?
Oh, you're getting outside of my league here on the classroom size. So
Mickey,
let somebody else jump. Yeah,
yeah.
there's Mickey.
Hello, everyone. So yes, again, in the guidance, we recommended up to 15 students. And that's simply because in these cases, we would want the teachers to be free to meet the individualized needs of all the students who are within the summer learning program. Thank you.
Okay. Another question,
Hey,
Robin.
Kelly,
Oh, go ahead,
Kelly,
Robin.
Sorry, I was not.
Yeah, you're on
I
mute.
would add also too to that as of right now, the guidelines in Healthy at School. So keep that 15 class limit in mind, but also remember that masks are still required and that the students in the classroom would need to be at least 3 feet apart.
Thank you.
So I guess the long answer to that, it really doesn't have anything to do with the funding, which is a permissible use of funding. It's about all the other things that you need to think about when you're doing that summer learning opportunity.
Next question is, can any of the ESSER funds be used to purchase textbooks?
Yeah, if you're utilizing that to assist your students in learning loss opportunities for the summer, even as you start the new school year, yes, they can be used to purchase textbooks or online curriculum as well.
All right, the next question that I have is, any more on ESSER? Okay, I think that clears us for ESSER right now. So I'm going to go just to the top of the Google Doc and just take it from there. What percentage of our new accountability model is graduation rate? And if we know that 9th through 11th graders staying back negatively affects it, we just need to know how much. So it looks like somebody has responded. Rhonda, are you on? Can you respond to that for me? Thank you.
I am happy to be with you this afternoon. So on the percentage in the new accountability system, it is 6% of the high school accountability is graduation rate, but the graduation rate is a combination of the 4-year and 5-year rate. So they are just averaged together and treated equally. So relatively low percentage on how it plays into accountability. And we anticipate the first reporting of that accountability information would be in the fall of 2022.
Great. Thank you, Rhonda.
And Rhonda, just to build on that, I know that this is a concern that several superintendents have, is if they accept the 128 students, what will be the effect on their graduation rate, and then what will be the effect on their their accountability results. There's just a lot of that we don't know yet, because we don't know how many students will take advantage of this, and it could be that there are multiple years of impact of it. If you have students that aren't seniors but are further down the line, there could be impacts that go on for multiple years. So I think one of the things that we can pledge to do from KDE is to keep investigating how we might take this into account. And we don't know that yet, because whenever we make changes to our accountability system, it intersects with state law, it intersects with regulations that the State Board of Education has put in place, and it intersects with the federal government, and they have approved our plan. So we'll have to look at where we can provide some relief, if that's possible, and who is the decision maker that can provide that relief. So it's a complex question, and what we can pledge to you right now is that that's something that we will work on.
That's right. And Dr. Glass, we've actually began discussions today with legal on what options might be available within our existing structures and our existing regulations and statutes. So appreciate the opportunity to share that with superintendents today.
Great. Rhonda, I think this next one might be for you as well. So I'm going to just keep you on, I think.
Sure.
If a student repeats a state assessment and receives a higher score, which one counts? The guidance says if they don't test, the lower score counts, but it did not clarify if they test and do better.
If it is, we have to handle this kind of by test. If it's K-Prep or our state summative, then every time the student is enrolled in a year, they should take the test associated with that year of requirements. So if I'm enrolled again as a 10th grader, I would retake the 10th grade assessments. Each time the student takes the assessment, their scores go into the school and district reporting. If it is, so it really isn't, did I do better, did I do worse? Just every time you take the assessment, your scores will count. They will go into the system. With the ACT, that is used for post-secondary readiness, and students many times take the ACT multiple times. The state provides for one administration as a junior. If a student repeated the junior year, we would provide the second administration. With the ACT, we look across all ACT administrations and look for the best score for each content area test. So best score is used with the ACT. With K-Prep, the regulatory requirements are, if you're enrolled, you assess in those required tests. And if the low score comes in, that was in our initial guidance, if a student is enrolled and does not take the test and does not have a approved medical exemption, then we would put the student into the system and we would apply the lowest score, which is novice. And that's the way the current regulation is set up. So let's see if we have any follow-up later on that, Tony, if that got to someone's answer there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Rhonda. I think after that, we're going to jump right into the supplemental school year. So I'm going to start, and I think this one might be for our partner over at Kia. For students currently in grades 9 through 11, can they retake a class that they passed this year to improve their grade? If so, how will that be handled on the transcript and in keys calculations? And then in parentheses, they state, I understand they cannot get credit again. They are interested only in the grade.
Yeah. Trying to get this to work. Yeah, so for that one, if the district has a policy in place where they will replace that grade entirely, then the Keys GPA can be calculated with the new grade only for that class, and just kind of bypassing that first attempt. But if there is no such policy, and then at that point, both of those attempts would be calculated into that Keys GPA.
Okay, great. Another question, if a senior is taking advantage of this supplemental school year for social emotional well-being due to the pandemic, what will their course curriculum look like? If graduation requirements are met with passing scores, will they take advantage of additional dual credit offerings? I know this was addressed somewhat in the slides, but I figured while you were on, maybe you could address this one as well.
Yeah, that second piece, I really don't have an answer for the first piece to that for the student, but the second piece regarding the dual credit, that kind of comes down to if the student has graduated, then they're no longer eligible for the dual credit. They can only do dual enrollment next year. So that doesn't change if they're a graduate. But if they're not a graduate and they're repeating, then certainly dual credit is an option for them.
Okay.
And Tony, let's expand on that beginning part. So the question is, if a student is taking advantage of a supplemental year for social emotional well-being during the pandemic, what will their course curriculum look like? So that's that first part of the question. I think that goes back to another question that we've received, so we may be able to answer both of these at the same time. What courses would a student who is repeating that year be taking? What we've said in the guidance is that it needs to be a course that a student has already taken, they're retaking, or something with a reasonable connection. And so therein lies some ambiguity and some local decision making, I think. What is a reasonable connection?
Okay.
Well, let's let.
So I think to follow up, yeah. So to follow up on that, so what our interpretation of the bill's intention was to have an opportunity to repeat 2020-2021 school year. So therefore, if we stick with that interpretation, then it should be repeating the courses that they took and did not successfully complete, or something associated with that. So something that would help expand upon that knowledge that they perhaps did not acquire during this school year. So it would be something related to that content. However, there are certainly going to be students who elect to participate who successfully completed all of their coursework this school year and are not interested in sitting through those courses again. They already got an A and they don't want to repeat it. In that situation, it really does fall on the district to sort of look at what courses are available and what it is that student might be offered and what coursework would be available to them. I think it is also something for school districts to share with parents who and students who are considering this, that there's a possibility that because of the courses that are available, that they would have to repeat to be full-time. And if they are not interested in doing that, then this might not be the best option for them. So the bill does not require that districts provide an entire new set of courses for students who are returning.
Thanks, Meredith. And just to expand on that a little bit, and one of the things I said to myself as we began this discussion is that we would not get into hypothetical world, and because it never ends. But I'm going to take us there a little bit, because I think that in this case, we need to give our district some ideas of what this term reasonable connection might look like. So based on what you've said, if a student took a set of courses, let's say they took Algebra 2 last year, and they made a C in that, and they feel like they'd like to take that again, that's certainly permissible. Or if a student made really any grade in that same course, but feels like I didn't really master the content and wanted to take that again, that would be permissible. If a student took an algebra course, and then as an extension, they wanted to go into calculus or trigonometry. That to me would be a logical extension or next course as well. What you wouldn't see is like a student that or what I would say would not be a reasonable connection. And of course, this is going to be a local determination. It's not going to be the state saying what this is. But if I were a local superintendent, if a student came to me and said, I passed all my classes, I got all my credits, I want to come back and I want to take swimming and band and family consumer science 3, and a whole grab bag of stuff that's not at all connected to what they did before, I would say no to that. So I think there's some interpretation that the local districts are going to have to make around what a reasonable connection looks like. But I think you look at the classes that they had, what their grades were, or what the outcome of that was, and then say, is this an opportunity to retake those or some connection to that? Meredith, how do you feel about that interpretation? Is there anything that you would clarify or change in that?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would say that we have been using some language to say that the district would be submitting a plan to the board for approval. And I do want to clarify that we will not be reviewing the plans, and so you do not need to specify what each individual student will be taking. However, I do think it is the district's responsibility to ensure that students who return have an academically appropriate year. So I would just clarify that is the responsibility of the district, of course, as it always is, to be sure that the students are enrolled in courses that are appropriate for them. So that would be my only additional point.
Great. Thanks, Meredith. And I think this is part of the world that we're in right now with Senate Bill 128. We talked a lot about there's a lot of gray area here. There's a lot of devil in the details that this bill is going to create, and this is one of those. This is one of those matters. So, where we can provide guidance, we are and will. But I also think that local districts, you're going to have to look at each student and what they're trying to do, and think about how you can apply these concepts in that situation. Let's move on to the next question. Thank you, Tony.
Okay. Next question is, will KDE recommend that local boards approve the resolution to provide emergency paid leave for staff for the 2021-22 school year? We've provided 10 additional leave days this year. Are there implications for staff who have declined the vaccine? If anybody can chime in on that one. If not, I can mark it and we can come back to it.
I thought I saw Todd's blinker lighting up.
Good afternoon.
There he is.
The determination on additional paid emergency leave for school district employees is really completely a local determination. So that would not be a matter for the State Department or State Board to opine on one way or the other. Recent legislation continued the ability for local boards of education to make a determination whether or not they would grant that additional paid leave to school district staff, and if so, how much leave would be provided and the conditions on that. So that's really a matter for a local board to determine whether they're going to provide that or not.
Okay, thank you, Todd. A couple questions in here again. I'm just going to quickly address that one real quick. Are districts going to be required to offer a virtual option for students during the 21-22 school year? And the answer on that is no. We have, I've seen that a couple times in here. So I just wanted to quickly address that one as I move on. Next question, Senate Bill 128 question. If a 9th grade student decides to repeat 9th grade, does the student have to retake English 9 or can they take English 10?
So I think that goes back to the discussion we just had. Can they take English 10? Yes, they could take the sophomore English. I guess that's the, that's where the local decision making comes in. Certainly, if they successfully passed their freshman English course, then it would make sense that they would move on to the next English level. However, that would not really be repeating they would be moving forward with their with their original class. And so I think that really goes to the district to sort of look at, is this student truly repeating their freshman year? So, or are they going to be kind of having courses that are in different levels? So that is, again, up to that local district to determine what access those students have to certain courses.
Okay. Please clarify, if a student passes courses in the 2021 school year and decides to participate in a supplemental school year, can his or her grades earned in the 2021-22 school year replace grades from 2020-21 school year?
Yes, so the bill does specify that the local school district can determine and develop policies on grades, schedules, classifications, the graduation ceremonies, and other issues around the students participating in the supplemental year. So if they have a policy in place for students to be able to replace grades, they would be able to do that.
Okay. The next question is, if a current senior student successfully completes all graduation requirements this year, are they required to graduate under KRS 158140 or applicable statutes? Or can this year be considered a do-over year with all credits being erased and retaken in a supplemental school year in 21-22?
So it is our interpretation that they need to graduate because they have satisfied all of those local and state requirements, and so they would be they shall receive their diploma as stated in the statute.
Okay. Next question that I have, what is the status of guidance from KDE regarding CTE for the supplemental school year program students? And it looks like I have a note in here that is being finalized. I don't know if David Horstman or Leslie Slaughter is on, that they could just elaborate for that a little bit on us.
So I'm not, oh, there's.
I'm on.
Okay.
Meredith is, we've got ongoing discussions that have been happening between TIA and CPE with that part of it. And then there's the Perkins piece. So all of that is kind of put together here in the last few hours. So whenever you all release that last guidance, Meredith would know more about when that's happening.
So we do have plans to have the next iteration of the guidance document hopefully released by end of the week. But I know that Leslie is specifically, Leslie Slaughter is preparing some additions that would address the questions about CTE. And she did include here in the chat that she does believe that access to courses as part of that career pathway would, additional courses would be considered a reasonable connection. So she did specify that in the chat, that if they align to the student's current pathway, that would be considered a reasonable connection. So I'm not sure if that was the CTE guidance they wanted, but that will be coming in the document.
Perfect. All right, they can elaborate if we did not answer that one for them, but hopefully we'll get that out to them here soon. The next question that we have is, if a school board approves for all students to go through the supplemental school year program and a student takes a class again, how does this impact their GPA if they are not a senior?
So I believe we've answered this, but happy to just reiterate again that that'll be a local district, so they need to have a policy that allows a student to repeat a course and replace a grade. So if they have that policy in place, then they are able to retake that course and have that hopefully improved grade replace the course that they had taken previously.
Okay. In regards to our special education students, there's a question here on Senate Bill 128. When a 21-year-old special ed student who will age out of the program asks for a supplemental year, would we only make that available for current 21-year-olds as of May 1st? Or would it be open to all of those involved in K-12 in this specific special education classification?
So that the way that the law now states, oh good, Greta is on, but any student who was enrolled in K-12 this school year is eligible for the program, but they would not have federal funding available for students after age 21. But Greta can provide additional clarification on that. Hopefully, Greta, are you there still? We saw you for a moment.
Yep, sorry about that. Any student that is enrolled would be able to request the additional year, but there are certain complications, if you will, that we would want to discuss. Probably individually would be best, because students that are over 21, FAPE is no longer required in Kentucky, and so the IDEA dollars would not be able to be spent on those students. But we can certainly work with districts with that. There's a very small number that were 21 as of the December 1 child count, so I think we're only talking around 37 students across the Commonwealth. But reach out with specific questions, and my office is happy to work with districts for those. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, switching over to athletics. We have a couple of questions there in relation to Senate Bill 128. If a student graduates, can they participate in athletics during the supplemental year?
Tony, if in fact the district has approved the education plan that Senate Bill 128 requires, they would have to be enrolled in 4 hours of instruction, but they certainly can participate in accordance with Senate Bill 128. That would be part of the local district's consideration.
All right, and then this one's also somewhat related. Can 8th grade students repeat the supplemental year and participate in high school athletics while retaining 4 years of eligibility for 9 through 12?
What at the top of our guidance, which incidentally we've just revised, polishing up a little bit about graduating students based on a lot of questions from yesterday. But one of the examples we use in there is that you ask the questions in terms of what grade they were in 2021. So an 8th grader in 21-22 who's in the SSYP designation could do the same thing an 8th grader in 2021 could do, meaning that they can't play up to a high school team in football and soccer. They can play up in a variety of other sports. They're still held to the middle school age limits, and it does not impact their 4-year count toward eligibility. So all those things wrap up together when you're talking about 8th graders who use this SSVP opportunity.
Okay, great. I think there might be another one in here that I'm having a hard time finding right now. So I'll come back to it. I know I saw it, but I'm having a hard time finding it. A couple of questions on virtual, the virtual school. So Marty Park, I think these are going to be for you. How would we establish a virtual?
Hey, Tony.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just before we leave 128, I want to go back to
a couple more, I think.
Okay. I want to go back to this this conversation around the reasonable connection, because I think that's ambiguous, and it's causing a lot of consternation about what does that mean, and how would a district determine that. So I want to ask Mickey, I know that she's on, and Todd, our attorney, to come on and talk about this a little bit. And we're opining and developing this on the fly, so give us some grace, everybody. We may need to go back and provide a clarification on this. We realize that it's confusing. The law is creating some unusual situations for us all to process through. But Todd, I wonder if you could speak to the reasonable, the supplemental, the meanings of those, and where they came from. And Mickey, I think you've got some ideas around how a district might apply through a standards lens. Is there overlap in the standards, and how might that help guide a district in what is reasonable and what's a supplement?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Glass. So Senate Bill 128 provides the supplemental year for the two distinct purposes for retaking and supplementing grades or courses. So that is where that language comes in. We know what retaking means. That's very clear to us. Supplementing becomes a little less clear, and the water becomes a little bit more muddy. So in internal conversations, we've, discussed what is supplementary in nature, what is not supplementary in nature. Obviously, we know that the intent of Senate Bill 128 is for a student to not move on to the next year or grade in their academic career, but it is to repeat those things that they have taken or supplement those courses that they have taken this current academic year. So moving, I think one of the examples that was provided from English 9 to English 10, we wouldn't consider English 10 to be supplementary. That's moving on to the next grade level. But perhaps there is another.
Just let me interject. So I want to own what I said earlier then, because I think what I described in the math example would be that. And so I want to be clear that, I said earlier that I didn't want us to hypothetical ourselves into a corner, and I think I did that. So I apologize to everybody for saying that. But can you say that one more time, just so we have clarity on that point?
Well, Todd, may I say one thing about that 9-10? So when you look at the standards course documents, that's a really good metric to determine what would truly be supplemental, because we know that those standards are aligned to course code. So strangely enough, when you look at the grade standards for 9 and 10 for reading and writing, they are the same. So in fact, this is a rare scenario in which a freshman student could move on to grade 10 because those content standards are the same. What's different is at grade 11, the 11 and 12 standards do change over. So you couldn't have a sophomore student who would then move on to English 3, because that's a completely different set of standards. And so Dr. Glass, your point about math, like all of those course standards are very different. So we would argue that would not be in the true intent of that supplemental or kind of repeating nature of what this program was supposed to be. There's obviously more flexibility with elective courses because a lot of those standards are in fact repeated standards. But in terms of the true kind of foundational courses there's not as much flexibility that's woven into the standards and the alignment to the courses.
I think ultimately we just need to emphasize again sort of what the intention of the bill was and sort of the spirit of it. And then now we are sort of being charged with what that looks like in implementation. And it's very challenging for us to provide guidance on this. So I would just reiterate again, the intention of the bill was for those students who had, as we all did, a very challenging 2020-21 academic year and school year, I should say, an opportunity for them to have a do-over was what was used. And so therefore, in considering applying to the program for parents and students to sort of think through those implications, right? What courses will I take? What will this look like for me? Several of my classmates will have moved on to the next grade. Is that something that would be challenging for me in a different way? I think ultimately, though, it really was supposed to be, the intention of it was, to have an opportunity to engage with academically the courses that perhaps in a virtual environment were challenging to really master, and those courses that would supplement that and ensure that you could master that content. So again, though, it will be a local decision, and we will not be reviewing those plans to that level of specificity. So I just want to reiterate again that it really is the district's responsibility to ensure that the coursework that students have access to is appropriate.
Great. Well, thank you both, and thank you, Todd. I think Mickey has really put forth a framework that you could use to make an evaluation of this, which is to look at the standards and see what content overlaps from that. So that could be one mechanism. And Mickey, do I understand correctly that you're working on supplemental guidance on this point?
Yes, so we have an addition, because we have received numerous questions on this very issue. So we have an addition to the guidance document that we'll be sharing with Meredith to get that updated and revised. But it will be very similar to what we just discussed and shared.
Okay. And I think in short, the answer on, is there a supplement or is it reasonable is it depends.
Right.
So you have to look at the coursework and how the standards align, and then make a determination based on that. Thank you all for going into some very technical weeds on this, but that's the world that we're in right now.
All right, so I've pulled out a couple more supplemental year questions that I feel like I don't think that we've addressed. So, or maybe for people who are late joiners, do students who stay back for a supplemental year have to attend a full day And I do think that there might be a KHSAA component to this too for eligibility. So I'm not sure who on staff could answer that question.
So there is not a requirement that they attend any specific amount of time. However, they need to attend for the full semester for them to be able to be counted in SEEK. So they need to attend the full semester. So from a finance question, they would need to complete a whole semester. From what Commissioner Tackett said, in order to be eligible to play sports as a graduate senior, they need to be enrolled full-time for at least 4 hours is the definition that KHSAA has put out. So different answers, but I guess it depends on sort of, certainly would depend on the student, but there's nothing that specifies that they have to be enrolled full-time as a graduated senior, I'm assuming is what they're talking about. Certainly if they are not graduated, then they need to be in school. We have compulsory education laws.
Okay. All right. The next question, trying to see if we have gotten, let's see, I'm going down the list here, Most of my stuff's in green, so that's good. Got a couple of virtual academies. I'm trying to look here. I guess using Senate Bill 128, can a student enroll at a community college and or a local college and be a full-time student at the high school?
So I'll take that. If the student can enroll, especially if they're not, they can enroll if they're a high school student. That's not a problem. If they're a graduate, though, they're not going to be eligible to enroll for dual credit. They're going to have to enroll as dual enrollment. So as a heads up with that, just remember that the dual enrollment could be subject to full tuition and fees and would not have the dual credit discounting.
Okay, we have a similar but kind of quick, similar but different question next. Is it possible for a full-time student to attend a local CTE center in person for a half day while choosing the virtual option for the remainder of their day?
Tony, I believe this question, and David Horseman, if you want to jump in as well, this question centers back on, in the virtual program, the full-time virtual enrolled program that's designed at each district and school level, is the student a good candidate for the program? And so, the answer to this question, I think, is likely that this question sounds to me like a performance-based design. And so if that's the case, then yes, that's complete, that's always been an option and a possibility. CTE students are in many, due to the program requirements and keeping in mind what's best for the student, generally CTE students that are in a pathway may not be good candidates for a full-time enrolled virtual school or program or academy. And so, however, this hybrid example in this question, I think definitely makes sense. And so could be a great candidate for a hybrid model. Again, traditionally leveraging the performance-based models that we have in place.
Okay, Marty, and then while you're on, how would a school establish a virtual academy? Does it need board approval?
So the answer to that question is back to how we establish generally established programs or academies at a district level. So however we do that, we want to keep this same strategy in mind. Just because it's a virtual program or academy, we don't want to try to do anything different. So generally, and if Todd wants to jump in here, but generally board approval on district level programs or academies. And I want to point out that if it is a program, an A5 program, then there's already a process in place for establishing that A5 program classification.
Okay.
And I would just say from the ATC perspective, if they are enrolled at the district, we're not checking to see what their status is, whether it's virtual, performance-based in that high school. We would still do our best to serve them in person at the ATC.
Okay.
And I'd like to add also to that second part of that question, I think the question was about what do you do to establish a virtual school, just not to get mixed up with an alternative program. So if that question is about the virtual waiver that went out, I believe, last Monday in the Monday email. So if that's what you're asking about, a virtual school, which would be for the 21-22 school year, then Todd, would they need local board approval before they submitted the waiver to KDE? Just to clarify that for the person that's asking.
Yes.
I believe it says so.
It does. Right. Any waiver request to the state board has to be approved by the local board first.
So you need to go back to that Monday email from last week, and the application is there, and that would reference the virtual school for the 21-22 school year.
And I love, Dr. Foster, that you pointed that out, because the waiver, specifically getting board approval on the waiver, is definitely written in there. We have school districts right now who already have a virtual program or academy that are trying to determine whether they apply, that's already board approved and is already established, and they're trying to determine whether they apply for the waiver. Again, the waiver needs board approval, but if you're in the process of trying to determine whether you establish a new program or a new academy, then you would need to follow the traditional steps that you would take in district to establish that.
Okay. All right, our next question. So can a district choose to have an online software platform for grades 5 through 12 as a project-based learning and not have to apply for the waiver?
Absolutely. And I want to point out a couple things there real quick. Absolutely, you do not need a waiver for a performance-based program that you have, but we do want to push on the annually assured, by our superintendents, the Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines that are established and give you a really strong basis by which to have that program in place. So again, if it's software driven, we see all across the state where Kentucky certified teachers are helping supplement when maybe that software package falls short. We want to push on that as much as we can, but absolutely, if you have a partnership with a program or a software application or a service that you have, then definitely you can continue to leverage that in the ways that you always have.
And Marty, just following up on that, so one important word that you said in response to that is the performance based. So if you're using this through the performance based funding model, really you don't need a waiver for that. What we're getting the waiver for is if you want the student funded like a typically enrolled brick and mortar student. So I think that's the decision. If a district wants to use an online program completely and they're okay with a performance-based funding model that has been in place, you do not need a waiver for that. If you want to use an online program and you want them funded like a regular student, you do need the waiver. Is that an accurate statement?
Perfect. Perfectly stated.
Okay. All right. Another question. What allocations for virtual academy or would allegations for virtual academy be required as they are for all other schools? And would the district manage this through the Summit Learning platform, for example?
So, Tony, this is a very specific question that I think we would need more clarity to answer accurately. Definitely, a couple statements I'll make or comments I'll make is as identified in the waiver document and application, as well as other resources that we've put out over the last couple years. Actually, a learning management system is critical in structuring learning with teachers and students in a way that makes sense and is helpful for kids. And so we would see a learning management system playing a role with that. You still need content developed by content experts, and you may work with a partner or have a third party help you develop that, or you may purchase that with a viable contract vehicle. However, the allocation question, I think, has a lot of different threads to it. The only thing I would say there is ensuring that decisions that you're making from a design effort perspective are sustainable from an allocation perspective. So the right number of teachers involved is definitely something to target, as well as the right number of supports for your students who may be full-time virtually enrolled.
Okay. A question, just can you describe the difference between dual credit and dual enrollment? Coming in towards the end here.
Tony, I think we have Amanda Ellis on the phone. I'm going to see if she can jump in on this since CPE has the dual credit policy.
Okay.
Yes. So the dual credit, and Becky, definitely jump in with the money stuff too, but the dual credit aligns mostly with juniors and seniors. And especially since we have the dual credit scholarship, they still get, if they're juniors and seniors, still get the discounted price. Dual enrollment means that they're enrolled in high school and in a post-secondary institution. And that means that they would have to pay their full tuition. So it doesn't give them the access to the dual credit pricing. So that is the big difference. And then Becky, any additional details that you all deal with financially?
Yeah, there's not really.
Okay. So that's the big difference.
Okay. Great. All right, I'm going to go back a little bit. We're going to bounce back and forth because we've had a couple of other ones come in. There is a clarification for athletic, I think. If they enroll, okay, so if they enroll full-time at community college and or local college full-time, they understand that they have to pay full tuition and not use the dual credit scholarships, but can they play athletics? These are the questions that we are getting from parents.
Well, Tony, if you're asking just on the athletic side, they simply have to be full-time enrolled using the criteria as you all have defined and further refined today in the call about either repeating the same courses or supplementing. So they can't be totally separated from the secondary school environment and still play.
Yeah, and from the scholarship perspective, I take it this question is about the students who are graduating this spring and then going on. And really, it's the graduation piece that makes the difference when we're talking about dual credit and scholarship eligibility. Everything kind of ends at the point of graduation. So even though they're coming back next year, they still won't be able to partake in the dual credit and the discounting and the scholarships.
Okay. Another question, just kind of jumping around. Given that we must provide allocations to schools by May 1st, do we just use the current numbers now or use the anticipated numbers based on those requesting to do over? Or do we wait until September to add?
Robin, could you come on and advise on this funding question, funding and staffing question?
You know, the dates are a little tricky because it's obvious that the dates of normal operations weren't taken into full consideration as you're thinking about switching to something different. You know, it's hard to tell, and I would like a little bit of time to consult with my staff on the effects of this. My gut reaction would be to just go ahead and use what you have now, because districts don't really know at that point in time what it's going to look like. But waiting until September to add may be too late. So let me circle back to my staff and see if I can provide a little more clarity on the pitfalls that might occur if we just stick with what we have now.
Great. So everyone's aware, we know that we are generating more questions, and more questions keep coming in around 128. So we're working on an FAQ document to try and address the new questions that come up just as situations arise. So this might be one of those that we could include in that, some clarity.
Correct. And for those of you who remember the FAQ document from last year, we'll try to keep it in a real visible spot in the communications page there for you. Next question. I think they're all kind of running together, you all. So if this is a repetitive one, but it's coming in towards the end, so I'm thinking that they may need some clarification. If not, then I apologize. If a current grade 9 through 11 student chooses the supplemental school year program when they became a 5th year senior in the future, will they still qualify for the dual credit tuition rate at that time, as they will not have yet graduated?
So yes, that's correct. Up to the point of graduation, the student's eligible for dual credit, even if they're in their 5th year of high school. Once they cross the graduation line, then literally that's when they become ineligible for anything dual credit.
Okay. All right, the next question we're going to ask about is related to the Governor Scholars Program. How are the students that have been selected for GSP or the Rogers Scholars Program affected, and can they apply for these programs in their repeat year?
Well, we don't have anyone from GSP on with us today, but I did hear the director, Dr. Cedeno, talking about this program earlier today. I'm not sure on the answer to this question, so I think we're going to have to ask the Governor Scholar Program how exactly they would answer this. So we can circle back and provide a response to this once GSP provides it.
Perfect. All right, I'll mark that one as one that we need to provide an answer to on the sheet there, Commissioner. Next question that we have is, I'm going through here. I think we're getting through most of these. Looking. Says it looks like we realized the waiver for the virtual program must be submitted by April 30th. So they're wanting to know if they change their mind after it's board approved and submitted to KDE, if they can change their mind after it is board approved and submitted to KDE. Due to time restraints with their board meeting here in the next week or so, we would need to have our submission ready for approval soon.
Yeah, I'll let Marty answer the technical parts, but you're not, even if you get the waiver, you're not required to execute it. So it's the two processes. The board can change their mind, the district can change their mind later. Go ahead, Marty.
That was a perfect answer. I think there is some a point, and again, I'm reading a bit more into the question probably, but when you submit your plan, if your plan narrative may shift or change and have iterations, that is fine. However, we want to make sure that, obviously if you change that plan narrative moving forward, and we expect some changes as you move forward, that you still go back to those 15 assurances and make sure that that new plan attends to those.
Okay. Next question, does KDE anticipate any avenues for relief from the 4-year graduation rate? Can students who use the supplemental school year program be coded in a different way that would address this concern? And just a comment that districts need a little bit of relief from this issue.
Yeah, we talked about that some during the webinar when Rhonda was talking. We don't know the answer to that yet. We are investigating possible ways that could happen, but again, it's entangled with state law, state regulation, federal law, and federal regulation. So we'll have to pull on that from a number of different perspectives and see what kind of accommodation we can provide. But I do understand the problem. We don't have a clear answer on it right now, but we knew that this would be one of the consequences of passing 128, is that it would possibly affect graduation rates. So this is one of the things that we're going to have to sort out.
Okay, and then a question here. No one can transfer to another district for their supplemental year, correct?
So only students who are enrolled in the school as of May 1st can apply for the supplemental year. However, we did hear Commissioner Tackett this morning share that that the transfer rules would still apply as they have previously if you were to have a change of residence. Is that correct, Commissioner Tackett?
Yes, ma'am. Basically, whatever school they're in May 1st, the way the law is written, and Todd or Chad can correct me, but the way the law is written, whatever school they're in May 1st is the school they can apply for the SSYP program through. And now we would hold that same standard.
Yes, we agree with that.
Okay. All right, I saw this one sneak in there between all the other ones about full day kindergarten programming. Can we charge tuition to full-day kindergarten students to recoup the additional cost to our district for providing this programming in 21-22? We are currently forecasted to lose significant funds next year.
What if we want to have Robin or Chuck or Todd possibly look at this one?
I will yield to Todd on this one.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, this is related to new language that we got providing SEEK funding for full day kindergarten. If anyone else on the call sees it as a different question, please chime in and let me know. But I would add that a district cannot charge a student tuition and also receive SEEK funding or Common Schools funding for educational services for which it charges tuition. So if a school district has a full day kindergarten program and will now receive SEEK funding for the full day kindergarten program, it cannot charge parents tuition for that full day kindergarten program.
Okay. All right. I think, thank you, Todd, on that one. I think that that's going to wrap us up, Commissioner, unless I don't think I've missed any. If you all are scrolling through and see any, there's a couple of other duplicate questions I believe that we've addressed. And again, as Dr. Glass mentioned, we are working on putting all of these FAQs into a document, very similar to what we had for the COVID-19 relief. So you'll be familiar with that, that we can update for you all. I'll toss it back to Dr. Glass.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks everyone for listening in. Great questions that all of you put forward today. They were really on point, and I know that several school district leaders in the state are wrestling with the same thing. So we really appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into the questions that you submitted. Thanks also for hanging with us as we sort of process through some of these out loud. There were a few that we didn't get to where we'll work on providing responses on those or greater clarity, including that FAQ document that Tony talked about for Senate Bill 128, and greater clarity around this reasonable supplemental question that we processed through together with you. We really appreciate the questions that you asked, your attentiveness, listening in, and we appreciate the patience that you've shown with us just as we are working through this. Well, we pledge to be responsive as things come up. We know that all of these situations keep evolving and changing every day. So if additional questions come in that we haven't addressed yet, please send those in to us. We'll work to be responsive to that and then share those answers out with everybody else. This is a dynamic situation, so we're working on that. I want to express my appreciation also to Becky Gilpatrick from being on with us from KIA, and also Commissioner Tackett for being on and answering questions from KHSAA. Thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.